Hello and welcome. I am Cyril Stober. Nigeria has a rich cultural heritage, no doubt about that. Across the entire land mass of the country are historical artifacts that depict the culture and traditions of the various peoples. Now, early visitors, particularly from Europe, not only found the land exotic, but also intriguing given its diversity. And that was the beginning of numerous artifacts being pillaged over decades, extending to modern times. Of recent, Nigeria has begun the steady process of retrieving many of its priceless artifacts nestled in museums across the world and in private homes. This will form part of our conversation as I sit with the Director General of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments, Professor Abba Tijani. Professor Tijani, welcome to One-on-One.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Cyril, for having me.
Right. Well, let's start from a general note by asking you to explain to us, if you will, the activities, the mandate, and what the National Commission for Museums and Monuments set out to do.
Well, the National Commission for Museums and Monuments started as an antiquity department during the colonial period, and later it was under the Ministry of Education, and then later it came under the Ministry of Information and Culture, and then it was renamed as the National Commission for Museums and Monuments. The commission is mandated with establishing museums across the country to depict our culture and display our cultural heritage and manage and preserve our artifacts. But also, the commission is also mandated with proposing our historical heritage for enlistment as national monuments, which the Commission also manages. But also the Commission is charged with the responsibility of regulating and overseeing museums across the country. Not only those of the national museums, but also museums in states established by state governments, private museums, institutional museums like university museums, and private museums. All are being regulated and controlled by the National Commission for Museums and Monuments.
Well, that's interesting. You talk about monuments. Let's have an idea of these monuments that abound in Nigeria.
Well, Nigeria is a very rich, country in terms of culture and our tradition. As part of that, different communities, traditional institutions and government actually come to identify with certain symbolic representation of our national identity, of our cultural identity and heritage. And in doing so, the federal government mandated the National Commission for Museums and Monuments to identify such symbolic structures and sites of cultural importance and historical importance to propose as national monuments, which the people will now be able to identify and relate with their identity, with their culture, and so on. I will give you an example. We have 65, presently we have 65 national monuments and sites in Nigeria, and we have 2 World Heritage Sites. The 2 World Heritage Sites are the first one, which is the Sukur Cultural Landscape in Adamawa State, and then we have the Osun Oshogbo Grove, which is in Oshogbo in Osun State. These are 2 World Heritage Sites, but also we have national monuments across the country. We have the Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa Mausoleum in Bauchi. It's a national monument. We have some, rock paintings, cave rock paintings in Bauchi, in Kebbi. We also have some historic buildings, like, for example, the Water House in Lagos, and so many other structures, many colonial buildings, like the Mongo Park, house, the Landa Brothers in Asaba, in Delta State, and so many of them. And some also traditional palaces of historic importance are being enlisted as national monuments. And when we say they are national monuments, it means that these structures will remain as they are. They can be renovated, but they must be under the supervision of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments.
All right, so 2 things have come out here. You have the national sites,
Yes.
and then you have 2 you call the World Heritage Sites. Now, who declares the World Heritage Sites and who declares the national sites? How do you determine which?
First of all, the national monuments is, as we hear and many people think, is something that you can just go and identify and just declare it as a national monument. It's not like that. It has a process, and it starts from the grassroots. So wherever this monument is located, first we have to go and engage with the stakeholders, the communities. If it's a family structure, we first engage with the family. They have to agree, and so on. So when we do that, we now engage our heritage officers to now make a documentation of this and interact with the stakeholders at the local level and then local government level. And in those stages, we now publicize to the public that this structure is now intended to be declared as a national monument. Any objection, anybody that wants to object to this should come out. Then there's a specific time, and when this is done, and then we go to the next stage, which is the state level. So we give the opportunity to the state, everyone in the state, to now come and air their views. And then we come to the national level. And the national level we normally, advertise in the newspapers, and then if there is any objection, then we take note of that. And after that process is done, then we now raise a memo through the Honorable Minister of Information and Culture to the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, who now assent to this, and then it is gazetted and declared as a national monument.
Right.
And then in most cases, when we come to the World Heritage site, what we do is, before it is being declared, we normally want that to be a national monument, because if we are declaring it as a as a World Heritage Site, then the nation will have to also identify with it and say that this is a national monument. So then we now prepare a dossier, which we now invite experts. Of course, we send it to UNESCO, which is the body that actually declares that as a World Heritage. And then UNESCO will now send experts in the field to come and look at the OUV, that is the universal, that is the overall universal value of that particular monument. And then if there is that value attached to it, that the world need to identify with it, then the expert will recommend to the UNESCO World Heritage Committee. And then during the UNESCO World Heritage Convention, then that is looked at, and then it is declared a World Heritage Site. And presently, Nigeria is one of the only 21 countries in the world as a committee member.
Now, this is all very interesting, and I'd like to go back a bit to the issue of structures which are declared as national monuments. You say they cannot be renovated. Now, the question here is, they can be renovated. Some of these structures are so old, and over time they get dilapidated. How do you preserve them? Because you're not renovating. What goes into preservation so that generations can still come and see them? Otherwise, they just remain in their state. Then chances are you probably would not see them as the way they were.
No, actually, they can be renovated. What I meant is that they cannot be renovated without the supervision of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments.
Now,
so we have to first look at the structure, and whatever renovation that would go into that should be the same as the original. That is why whatever we are doing, we have to make sure. So if it is a mud structure, you cannot use cement. So you are introducing an alien thing, which means you are suggesting at that time, cement was being used, which is wrong. So these are the kind of things. So we are to supervise it before it is being renovated.
Let's look at some specific examples here. Let's take Kano, for instance, the old Kano city. There are so many things that have historical value, and which a number of generations would really want to see, apart from what you read in the history books. But this was renovated. Talk about those walls, for instance, the old city walls, with the various gates. And these were features in many cities in northern Nigeria. Some have been renovated. So how about that?
Yes, we actually supervised the renovation, and it was a funding from an NGO in Germany that helped in this renovation. The Kano city wall actually is one of the historic, city walls in Africa, and Kano city as itself. And we actually wanted to propose it as a World Heritage site, but unfortunately, Kano city wall is being encroached over the years, and a lot of what has been done has defaced what it used to be. And that actually brings the question of how really do we respect our cultural heritage? How much do we respect our cultural heritage? And how much do we identify with our, traditional, traditional establishments? And this is one of the things. And presently, we are engaging with the Kano state government, because we find that the Kano city wall is being completely destroyed, and you see a filling station established in that area. And when I went to visit that, I was shocked, and we are engaging with the Kano state government, with the palace of His Royal Highness, the Emir of Kano, and the present Emir of Kano, actually, he was district head when, this issue was brought out, and now as the Emir of Kano, he is helping with, trying to regain most of this part of these city walls that are being destroyed.
So this is a struggle between the old and the new, ancient and modern. Say a lot of people have encroached, and certainly sometimes parts of these areas you talk about are also given out by government agencies. So how do you coordinate with the states, for instance, on how, yes, while modernizing cities, or how not to destroy, historical sites such as those?
Yes, it's unfortunate, actually, and I think one of the things is that our laws need to be revised. The laws of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments need to be revised, and we are in the process of doing that, because if you encroach on monuments, the penalty at that time, we are talking about shillings, and it still exists. So we have to reverse, and the jail term and the rest. So it still exists. So the penalty is not commensurate with what we have today.
Probably a
So
few
we,
shillings at that time, and
absolutely, yes.
if you convert them at whatever rate it was at that time, it
Yes.
would be pittance.
Yes, exactly. So we are reviewing the laws, and we are also engaging the community for them to know the value and importance of our cultural identity and cultural heritage. You're talking of the China City Wall. You are talking of, you go to modern, cities across the world, developed countries, you find that their old structures are still intact and are being managed. And I think we need to respect that. Development and modernization does not mean that it is against traditional institutions, but you have to do it in a way that it doesn't affect the overall universal value of what we have as our traditional heritage.
Okay, that's for the national monuments. We do have museums all over the country, except that for many people, the state of those museums would be another matter altogether. Some run by states. In fact, let's start with the national.
Yes, we have in Nigeria today 53 national museums across the country. So it means that we are in every state of the country, and in some states we have more than one national museum. At the time when the idea of establishing national museums came, was to see what we could do with the findings of our traditional artifacts across the country. So the Nok, for example, culture, when it was discovered, we thought that there's the need for us to have a museum in that place to house these artifacts. The same thing with the Benin, the same thing with other museums across the world. And that's why we have, for example, the first museum in Nigeria, which is in Kwara State, which is in ACA, was also established because at that time the ACA softstone were discovered. So the national museums are actually spread across the country and established in line with the findings of our discoveries of our traditional, cultural heritage. And over time, we have been establishing these national museums, and without actually taking care of, what they will become in the future, expansion and so on, and modernization. The museum artifacts are, they are, old objects, and therefore need more care. And therefore we have to acquire modern devices to regulate the environment and also security and the rest. So that expansion was actually not taken into consideration in most of the museums when they were established. But when I came in just the last 1 year, I actually, as a specialist in the field, knowing fully what, as a museum, what it needs to be done, I started this issue of renovation of our museums and upgrading of our galleries in earnest. So I can tell you that so far we have renovated more than 10 national museums and upgraded our galleries, and we will soon commission these new renovated galleries and museums across the country. If you go to Jos today, you will see that you will have a new gallery, completely different. Once you go into the gallery, you will think that you are in a museum in a developed country.
Well, there are some other classical examples which we might point to. For instance, you talked about Benin. We know a lot comes out of Benin in terms of bronze and the rest of it. But there's an interesting aspect, the Benin moats. What about those, though?
Well, the Benin moat is there. It's an archaeological, potential. We have been engaging with our partners, outside the country, particularly with museums in Germany and in UK. And we are going to have funding to excavate the Benin moat, so that we will discover, probably there are a lot more to discover about Benin culture, you know, and you know, the Benin bronzes and so on. So it's a kind of a wall that, you know, encircles the Benin city. So it's still visible, and it's a national monument itself, and it's protected.
This brings me to the question that most people would love to ask, and it has to do with artifacts, priceless pieces of Nigerian art that have been taken out, in fact stolen from this country over time, and there's evidence that at some level it is still going on today. We see the recent efforts to repatriate those artifacts. Let's talk about them.
Yes, you know, the museums, as I was saying, that there are two issues. Stolen in terms of, you know, objects in the museums, and then we have the punitive expedition, the Benin punitive expedition, as we know historically. You know, the British colonial soldiers came in and invaded Benin City and cut away with so many Benin bronzes. There are two things now. One is the issue of museum security. Now, when you have museum, as you know, museum is a place where you keep priceless, you know, objects, and therefore security is paramount. And the regulating the environment is very important. And therefore, we must secure our museums. But over the years, what we have of our museums are that, you know, we have porous, you know, museum where the storage and the galleries are exposed, and we have so many of our staff that are not professionally employed. The ethics of the profession is not there in them, and when you give them these facilities to look after, there's tendency of, you know, as human beings that may have a second thought and think about what, you know, is going to happen and so on. So in terms of, you know, having access to that, and then, you know, collaborate with people that will steal these objects and so on. So when I came in, there are a number of artifacts that were stolen, but we took the process of reporting, you know, to the various, you know, institutions, the Interpol, you know, the various regulating institutions across the world and countries and so on. So we make sure that we give them the photographs of these objects, measurements, descriptions and so on. And we have a few of them actually being retrieved. And as part of this also, it's a bit maybe wide, but I need to mention it,
Right.
that is very important, is that no matter how you secure your museum, no matter how, you know, standard in terms of internationally, you know, established museums across the world, how you raise the standard of your museum, the most important thing is that you have to have control of your borders so that these objects will not go out of your borders. So you have to collaborate with the various security agencies, the custom, the police, airport security, and the rest.
Yes, because after all, when
Yes.
these things are taken, they take them through the borders.
Yes, exactly.
You know, if they fly out with them, they go through customs, and
Absolutely.
these things go away.
And also, very important, to also go into bilateral agreement with different countries where these artifacts are being, you know, seen as having so much value. So we have to sign agreements with them, which we have done with many countries.
Prof, let me ask you this. Yes. How do you respond to the feeling in certain countries where you have Nigerian artifacts that were taken away, stolen, you know, and you demand for them, and you're told that the challenge here is you do not have the capacity to preserve them as they would in such. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think these are all, you know, strategies on their side to buy time, but also to bring excuses for hanging on to these artifacts. Now, in this case, we are talking about the Benin bronzes, which were actually taken out of the country illegally. Now, we have the UNESCO Convention of 1972, which says that all artifacts that were illegally taken out of their country should be returned to their countries of origin. And based on that, Nigeria is reaching out to all countries where our artifacts are being held in museums to now return our artifacts back to us. And we have been making progress. And a number of countries have responded. Just last year, we went to Germany. Germany have agreed to repatriate all the Benin bronzes in Germany, which is over 1,030. But we also need to understand that the German position is a very good example, because Germany was not the country that invaded Nigeria and took away these objects. But the objects that found themselves there, they said that it's morally wrong for them to hang on to artifacts that are proceeds of, invasion that were illegally taken, and therefore they want to return them back to the country of origin. So, which is a good example to other countries, especially like Britain, that are still hanging on to these artifacts.
Yes, Britain is hanging
British
on to
Museum.
so many of these ones too. So what's the position like?
The British Museum has the largest, collection in one single museum. They have about, I think, over 900, and we are engaging with them. We have given them an official request letter for the repatriation last year. Even though it was made before, many years before, but we now said, okay, let us, because there are a lot of, discussion that, British Museum is saying that they have not seen any formal request. So we have made the formal request, and we are engaging with them. And already we have repatriated one artifact from Cambridge, one from Aberdeen, and also the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology and Anthropology in Cambridge is also willing to repatriate all the artifacts in their collection, and also the University of Oxford Museum also is willing to do that. So in the UK, all the institutions are doing it. It's only the British Museum, and I think they will have to succumb eventually.
Well, we've seen the return of a few of these things. How was this achieved? I know a lot of diplomacy went into that. First, let's look at the process where those ones you mentioned that have come back home, how it happened, and then we come back locally and see what's going to happen to those that have been returned.
So what happened is that there were a lot of meetings and engagements that took place between museum directors in Europe and with the commission here in Nigeria. And there was this, what we call the Benin Dialogue Group, that started, and that was an avenue for us to reach out to the various museums that are holding our artifacts. And through these personal engagements and through the, the Benin Dialogue Group, we were able to reach and explain to them the need for them to, agree with the issue of repatriation, but also the Black, life matters help a lot in that. And actually that instigated, triggered, but also that also enable Europeans themselves, not the government, but the citizens in Europe, to understand that, there's a need for any item of historical importance that are being stolen and as lying in their museums, in their countries, should go back. So people started complaining, protesting, and so even students actually started protesting. And that actually influenced the various museums and governments to now decide to consider the issue of repatriation. And then we were able to reach out to them, and that gave us the opportunity to now agree on this issue of repatriation with them.
Prof, there's this little matter of repatriated artifacts, and who do they belong to? States? Nigeria? Or or certain monarchies?
Well, the issue, in the case, for example, the issue of Benin bronzes, the Benin bronzes were actually taken at the palace of the Oba of Benin at the time when the Europeans came in and invaded and, disposed the Oba at that time. Now, at that time, Nigeria was not a country.
Right.
So the Oba's palace was a sovereign, entity at that time. Now, when today we are talking about Nigeria as a country from 1960, of course, then we are talking of anything that you are talking about. We are talking about Nigeria now. So what happened is the convention, the UNESCO convention, which says that, artifacts that are illegally taken out should be returned to their countries of origin. We are talking about state to state.
Right.
So in this issue of repatriation, any institution or government will be engaging with the federal government. And the National Commission for Museums and Monuments as the agency of the federal government that is in charge of that matter. So what we are saying is that even the Oba of Benin said that the National Commission for Museums and Monuments will be the institution that will handle the issue of repatriation.
Okay.
By the time the objects come to Nigeria, now it is left to federal government now to decide on how these artifacts will now be located. It is very important when we are talking about this, we are talking about national heritage as well. And in whatever we are doing, we are talking about 5,000 or more artifacts. And if we are talking about 5,000 artifacts, we can have museums, that can, there is no one single museum or two museums that can house these 5,000 artifacts. And therefore, we have to have, museums that will be dedicated for these repatriated artifacts, so that other Nigerians also will have the opportunity to see these artifacts that they never saw in their lifetime.
You see, I'm raising this because, as you well know, Prof, a little controversy started over the repatriation of one of these artifacts, and that where would it be domiciled? And you've heard citizens express views, diverse opinions. Some say no, put it in the palaces, or it belongs to royalty. And others say, look, let's have a national site where they can be. But you see this as a problem that might eventually crop up when you bring back, you have close to how many thousand out there when they come back. If we don't get it right at this time, would that be a challenge too?
Yeah, no, it shouldn't be, because it's all about understanding, what our priorities are, and also how do we want to engage, because these are objects of national importance, of our heritage. And what we are even saying is that, these museums that are going to return our artifacts, we are, as museum institutions, we also collaborate with them. We are presently, giving our objects on loan to these museums to go and display them. Presently at the Smithsonian in the US, we have artifacts that are on exhibition on this, on Caravan of Gold, which is presently going on. And we also have similar ones in other countries. So we are saying that these objects, first, we want to take the ownership, legal ownership. And then we can also engage with these different museums so that they will be able to have these objects on loan, which they can continue to display to the European, community and other countries,
and then bring them back.
So that we have to specify the number of years or time these loans will be, and then. But we are doing that for two purposes or more, actually. One, we are doing it so that we now showcase our cultural heritage, for these people to know and identify, and our artistic genius, the artistic genius of our, ancestors. because these are really immaculate, artifacts which even the Europeans respect, and the skill and artistic genius in which these artifacts are being produced. And that is one. Secondly, we have to do it because we want to generate revenue. They are the ones that have been generating revenue all these years. So now this time around, we'll now give them a loan. They will exhibit, travel exhibitions and so on. We'll now get returns,
Right.
in hard currency. So we're not talking about oil now also, but we're talking about, our cultural, artifacts generating revenue for us. But also, we are engaging in scholarship, in research, so that we will attract scholars to come and do more research on these artifacts. And in doing so, we are enhancing scholarship and also, developing our economy as well.
Right. Speaking of scholarship and revenue that can be generated from these artifacts, the thinking is if they are kept away from public view, they'd hardly generate the revenue that we're talking about. And also, not many would have access to carry out research. At least I do know that the palaces of royalties are not places you access easily, except for a select few. So how is the National Commission going to coordinate with all the the various parts of this country that have these artifacts that may be returned to their locality, on how the public, younger generation, can access them, and researchers can also have a foothold in there?
Yeah, that's why I was saying that, given the number of artifacts that we are expecting over the years, we have the opportunity now to site museums that can house these artifacts. The Benin Royal Palace can have their museum where some of these objects can be displayed, and for national interest, we can also have a larger museum in Benin. With the existing museum, we can expand it, and then some of these repatriated objects can be displayed in that museum. And we are looking at the possibility, of, not the possibility, actually we are looking at having a national museum in Abuja, which we don't have.
Right.
When I came in, I was surprised, we don't have a national museum in Abuja. So there's a need for us to have a national museum in Abuja. And this is a gateway where we have visitors from outside the country. We have the diplomatic, community and so on. So therefore, they have their visitors coming in. So whenever they come, they're asking about, where is your museum? Where is your museum? We have to refer them to Lagos, to Benin, to Ibadan, and Kaduna, and the rest. So if we have a national museum in Abuja, this will be another opportunity for us to display these repatriated objects.
Prof, as one who's been in the field and an academic, how would you rate the enlightenment and the knowledge about the value of artifacts and sites and historical sites like that among the general citizenry?
We have a big problem. We have a big problem because we have a generation that are not informed about our culture and about our heritage. And if we don't do something, we'll continue to lose them, because that is the actually genesis of having all these societal problems we have been having. Drug abuse, all this banditry and the rest, because people don't respect and understand their culture, simply because they didn't grow up, in understanding about our culture. So there is the need for us to revive this aspect. And one of the things we want to do at the National Commission for Museums and Monuments is first to digitize our artifacts, so that if we digitize our collections, we will be able to now put them on a certain platform that will now engage the youth, because most of the youth now are interested in the social media, in their devices and so on. So we now want to now take this to them, so that they will be able to access this through their phone and create a kind of problem-solving software or something that they will be able to be engaging, ask questions to know about their culture, about their heritage, about this and so on. So through that, they will generate interest. And that will now enable them to be attracted to the museums, where they will now want to go and see the physical artifacts themselves. So we are trying to create this kind of situation so that we will be able to engage our youth to understand about their culture and their heritage.
The other aspect of my question has to do with you as a scholar, an academic, for instance. You know that we know that some of these carvings and artworks were associated with traditional religious beliefs at some point in time. Now, how do you, what's the meeting point here with the modern day religions that many citizens have adopted and seen these other objects which some would dismiss and say, no, these are relics of religions that we no longer practice? How do you wade through this maze sometimes, if you like?
Well, I think we have to, of course, respect our religious beliefs, but also our culture is very important. It's our source of identity, and our source of attachment to where we belong to.
Okay, because all right, yes.
So I'm coming. So therefore, we need to respect our culture. And what happened at the time these artifacts were produced, not all of them are produced for religious purposes. Some of them are for reasons of immortalizing, because, like, for example, the queen head, the Benin queen head, is not meant for religious purposes. Right. And there are some other symbols of communication. Some of these items are inscriptions to record history of what transpired and so on. So this, we are talking about our cultural heritage, and there is a sort of line to be drawn between the religion and cultural heritage.
Okay.
And therefore, because if you want to go into that, because it's a sensitive subject, right, and therefore it attracts a lot of other...
I know, it's sometimes a very thin line, because
our culture is our culture.
Yes, because we do know that yes, due to certain beliefs, for instance, certain figures and carvings are not permitted in certain parts, and they're seen as as basically pagan issues. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's why they are not, placed somewhere in a religious place or anything where these things are not accepted. And museum is a public place where people will go, and once these artifacts are there, people can go and understand about their history, about their culture, about their past. So it's a matter of documentation to say that this thing existed. So that is a way of understanding where we came from.
Okay. Well, sometimes beyond those who invaded communities and took away things, sometimes you do find, and it happens even now in modern times, you find from rural settings people who are custodians of some of these artifacts, not realizing to the import of their actions, sometimes give them off to visitors, or sometimes sell them at ridiculous prices in order to make a living. And how do you intend to go about this?
Well, it's very important for us to curtail this. And what we did is, first of all, there's what we call the Artifact Rescuers Association of Nigeria, ARAN. This is a body that we recognized and we are engaging with. Now, these people will go to the various communities and rescue artifacts that people want to cut away with them, and then give them some monetary value that they want. And these objects will now come to the museum, and then we now we now compensate these people so that these objects now will go to museum. By doing this, we are not only discouraging people to go to other people to sell these objects to, but also we are discouraging people from taking them outside the country. Because if we don't do that, by the time they now smuggle it out of the country, they will be able to get more money for it. And that is why we are engaging these people who are in the communities to go and rescue these artifacts, and then we now compensate them, and then we will now take these objects to museums and keep them.
Well, let's talk about the preservation of some of these items. Some, of course, include writings, and modern technology has provided the backbone for the preservation in highly advanced societies. How far have we gone in Nigeria to be able to keep some of these documents, writings, books, some of them holy books, really, to ensure that they can still keep for hundreds of years?
Yes, we have actually advanced in the area of manuscript preservation in Nigeria. I happen to be working with the University of Hamburg, where they have the Center for these cultures of manuscripts in Germany, and also in the US. And so I was working before I was actually appointed as the Director General of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments. Now, we have already documented so many of our manuscripts in Nigeria. The Arewa House in Kaduna has a large collection of manuscripts, especially Islamic manuscripts, and that they are all being documented, digitized, and well dusted and preserved, and put into a folio which is acid free, so that they will not degrade. That is done in Arewa House. And now we are also collaborating with Arewa House because they have the facilities and they have the studio where these things are digitized. So the collections, the manuscripts, and the National Commission for Museums and Monuments are now being relocated to Kaduna, closer to Arewa House, where these things are now, digitized, preserved, and digitized. So we have actually advanced in this line, and we are also collaborating with some other institutions that are also interested in preservation of manuscripts. So we are looking across the country to see how we can, do that in collaboration with those institutions.
Well, it's said that no matter all the technology that you employ, you still have to, a large extent, rely on the professionalism of people who are charged with the responsibility of running the museums and such places. So let's look at the professional staffing of the National Commission for Museums and Management and Monuments. What is their status at this point in time? In your opening comments, I recall that you mentioned something about some of the staff not being professionals.
So now is a thing of the past, because we have organized our staff, and we have done a lot of workshops and conferences, and we have been engaging with other museum institutions in capacity building. Just recently, some of our staff came back from Germany, where they went to different museums with some other people from other African countries, and were actually engaged in museum, activity and so on, so that they would learn on the spot job. And we have been doing that, and we'll continue to engage our staff in that. And one of the things that we are looking at also is that the museum is an institution, it's a research center, it's a learning institution, it's an educational institution. And because it is under the civil service, we have problem of putting them in the proper salary scale. And that is one of the things that I've taken up. I'm engaging with the Salaries and Wages Commission to see that the staff of the commission are placed on Conrise, which is similar to the research institutions. Because what we do in the museum is all about research, documentation, and educating our students, our pupils in schools, because we organize workshops, we organize teaching, So all the different departments we have in the commission are research related and education related. We have the education department, we have the archaeology, anthropology, we have the heritage, we have the museum department, conservation, and so on. All these are research related and educational related. So by the time you now, take care of your staff welfare, and emoluments, and I think they will be better placed and then work, as they should be. So these are the things that we are doing, and we are also engaging them in modern digitization and ICT compliance and the rest. And I believe that will reposition their thinking, and things should improve.
Right. Prof, as we wind down, there are so many sites and monuments across Nigeria. It would be virtually impossible to select each one and talk about them. But there are a few that, for certain reasons, would come to mind, especially for me, for instance. Would look at some places in this country that are, tied to the history of this country. Niger State, Zungeru.
Yes.
What has this commission done about those places that are of immense historical value to the evolution of modern-day Nigeria?
Well, what happened is in any place where we have some historical importance, the most important thing is to secure the place. And Zungeru is one of the places that is really in a very bad situation. And the commission has now put in place a process where we'll rehabilitate that place and properly engage it so that people will be able to go and understand where the first Nigerian citizen was born, and the house that was situated there, and so on. So we have that one. We have the one in Kogi, also the Mango Park house, which actually was really in a bad situation, but we have renovated that place. So I can tell you categorically that is now very comfortable for people to go and visit.
So how soon is Zungeru coming on board?
Give us till the end of the year. It's not only Zungeru, we have so many. So many. And in fact, we are looking at also the house of the late President Shehu Shagari. The family have contacted us, and we have started documentation, and we'll soon present it. We have about over 100 monuments in line now for presentation to the Honorable Minister to present it to the President for enlistment.
Well, I suppose as we close, we must bring this up and say, yes, there's a lot for you to do. We're looking at you reviving, renovating, and bringing all those sites to standard, and that would require funding. So how far with the funding of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments?
Unfortunately, in terms of funding from the government, is not really something that we can say will take us to the glory days. What we are looking at is also engaging the private sector, so that those that are interested in culture and promoting our heritage, we approach them, and then we collaborate with them so that they will be able to rehabilitate most of our museums and monuments. And we have done it in Bauchi. The Museum of later Sir Tafawa Balewa was actually funded through this private entity. So we are able to renovate the galleries And the state government has agreed to renovate the structure, the monument itself. And we look forward for them to fulfilling their promise. And we also have, corporate organizations. So we are approaching them. The banks are there. Because every time I have opportunity, I always say that banks are, institutions that we can collaborate with.
Okay.
Because these are places where people always go. And so if we can collaborate with them, even if it is pictorial, exhibition of our artifacts, when people go to banks, they will be able to see and say, oh, these objects, this from this part of the country, from that part of the country. Through this, they will develop interests, and that will attract them to museums. So we want to engage with banks, and this is an opportunity for banks also to come in and invest in our culture.
Oh, well. Professor Abba Tijani, Director General, National Commission for Museums and Monuments, it's been interesting talking to you. Thank you for coming on One-on-One.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's really a great opportunity for us to make Nigerians to understand about our activities.
All right, thank you. And that's our program today. We thank you for watching. Next week, we'll be back with One-on-One. I am Cyril Stover. Continue to stay safe.